Well, we're entering the closing stages of the US midterm elections, with the last of the votes being tallied up tomorrow. The competition is heating up between the Democrats and the Republicans. Hundreds of supporters of Republican Ron DeSantis greeted the governor in Florida at a separate rally for Donald Trump. It was a proud moment to see so many red voters in his home state. Not only did he promote his fellow Republicans, he also hinted at running for the presidency yet again.
It's great to be here in my home state of Florida. This is my home state. With thousands of proud, hardworking American patriots, incredible people. Just 2 days from now, the people of Florida are going to re-elect the wonderful, the great friend of mine, Marco Rubio, to the United States Senate. And you're going to re-elect Ron DeSantis as your governor of your state. In order to make our country successful, safe, and glorious, I will probably have to do it again, but stay tuned.
With just a day before those polls close in the midterm elections, President Joe Biden will hold a rally on friendly terrain in Maryland. The president earlier visited Pennsylvania on the weekend, where he was joined by former President Barack Obama, both agreeing that democracy is on the ballot.
Democracy is literally on the ballot. This is a defining moment for the nation. And we all must speak with one voice regardless of our party. There's no place in America for political violence. No place for what we saw happen to Paul Pelosi, a friend of mine, and Nancy's husband. No place for voter intimidation. You see these guys stand there with rifles outside of polling places? Come on. Where the hell do you think you are? No, well, I shouldn't get going.
Economic issues remain a primary concern for most voters. Joe Biden, in that rally in Pennsylvania, boasting of the 10 million new jobs that his administration has created. But voters' highest priorities are still largely divided along partisan lines, with abortion rights continuing to resonate strongly for Democrats, whilst for Republicans the focus sharply remains on inflation. Some topics that drew attention in previous elections, consider for example the COVID-19 pandemic, are relatively muted this year. In the days leading up to the vote, a series of false and misleading claims have also gone viral. Some of the claims cast doubt on the legitimacy of the voting process. Others include manipulated content from across the political spectrum. Well, for more on this, we're joined by our correspondent, Susan Tarani, who's been following the campaign shortly. Susan, a lot of those sentiments, it must be said, have been echoed by the former President Donald Trump before, about how elections shouldn't necessarily be trusted. Consider the fact that a majority of the candidates he's endorsed believe he didn't lose that election in 2020. What does that mean for the outcome of this election? Could we get to a situation where, for example, candidates are simply refusing to concede?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen something like that happen throughout election cycles. We saw that happen with Al Gore in the year 2000. We saw that happen with Hillary Clinton in 2016, where she constantly called Donald Trump an illegitimate president, and then ultimately, just fast forward really quickly, we saw that with Donald Trump saying that he didn't really accept the results of 2020. Moving on. Moving forward, I think we're going to have to wait and see, how the results come and pour in. But I think the Democrats have really tried to hone in and focus on this message of democracy being on the ballot, despite the fact that, well, the ballot is democracy, the fact that Americans are going to the polls, they're practicing their democratic right. And the only people that are really at this point talking about Donald Trump right now and his denial of the 2020 campaign, for the large part, are the Democrats. You know, Republicans have really, and the reason why they're so popular in the polls, they've tried to focus on kitchen table issues like inflation, and then on the other hand, you know, on issues that a lot of other voters resonate with, like crime as well. So, you know, moving forward, we'll have to wait and see what the results are, how they pan out, how the counting goes, moves forward. But we also have to be careful on where these megaphones and these headlines are coming from about, you know, the big lie, so on and so forth, and whether or not they're just deviating public opinion and attention at this point.
And on that note, I mean, you know, we heard the Democrats speaking about how democracy is hanging by a thread. Do they offer any proposals to deal with that crisis besides, you know, prompting and urging voters to support them?
Yeah, it's hard to imagine what else they would want to run on at this point, considering the fact that a lot of their policies have not resonated with the majority of American voters. And I think at this point, so late in the game, that's probably the only message that they hoped to sort of bring home in really trying to bring more voters to the poll. Whether or not it will work or not, again, we'll have to wait and see. It's highly unlikely because all of the polling that we've seen until now will probably just we'll have to take it with a grain of salt. From now on, it's all going to be about Election Day and people really thinking, you know, looking at their gas tanks, looking at their grocery bills, how they get to these polls, and thinking about their future, and then, you know, going and casting their ballots, whether or not they're going to think about democracy or they're going to think about their own lives personally, you know, is going to really, you know, that's what's going to determine what they're going to vote for. It's hard to imagine the majority of Americans think that, you know, this 200 so years of experiment is really hanging by a thread if they don't vote for the Democrats.
Susan, thank you so much. Susan Tehrani joining us from New York. No doubt we will be returning to her for her analysis as we get votes in and counted over the course of the next 48 hours. Let's stay for now with this main story in the United States of the upcoming midterm elections, and we're joined by Calvin Dark, global affairs commentator and Democratic strategist. Calvin, thank you for joining us. We heard Susan there earlier talking about how this is very much the final stages. I know that you've been analysing lately how much of an impact advertising can be in this election. Is there still a chance that in those states where the margins are so tight, Pennsylvania and Georgia, that these 24 hours of campaigning or of advertising can still make a tangible difference?
Yes, they definitely can, because, you know, millions of Americans have already voted. You know, I voted 2 weeks ago. But right now, all the campaigns for all the races for both parties know that it's about turnout. And because, as you said, so many of these races are close, literally knocking on doors, making those final calls to see if somebody requests a ballot, have they turned it in? If somebody needs, for example, transportation to the polls. And then, of course, every ad on TV, one after the other, is a campaign ad. And I think in close races, it could make the difference because it's about getting people out there.
And before we get too excited about all of this being resolved, I guess, you know, by Wednesday morning, I think people must understand, I guess, that this could be drawn out in races where it's close. There could be recounts, could be runoffs in Georgia. Just take us through how, in fact, the midterms might not be all tied up even by the end of this week.
That's definitely true. And I've noticed that a lot of candidates are reminding their supporters of that. Unfortunately, you have some leaders like former President Trump that cast suspicion if we don't know by, say, midnight tomorrow night. But the reality is that there are some states that won't even begin to count until the polls close. There are some states that may have a runoff, Georgia in particular. That wouldn't be until December, so we wouldn't know necessarily who has control of the Senate by then. But what we will be able to see on Tuesday night is for the states that do the counting a little faster, North Carolina's one, Florida's another, we'll be able to see the trends to see, if this is a red wave, how Republicans are doing, or if there's something that we haven't been able to expect.
Well, no doubt we'll be keeping a close eye on that as well. Thank you, Calvin Dark, global affairs commentator and Democratic strategist.
Thank you.